Want to build a tech startup? What do you do?
Entering the fifth industrial revolution.
What do you think outside of the tech has changed?
Every industry is going to radically evolve.
Should they still learn how to code?
We do need to be sort of fearful of what AI could do when it's...
David Zaretsky is a serial entrepreneur, founding multiple companies over his career, while serving as professor at Northwestern University, specializing in AI, computer science, and electrical engineering. He's taught hundreds of students, including myself, about the best ways to leverage AI while building a startup. It's my pleasure to sit down with him once again. So, Professor, you obviously began your career at Northwestern. You went there as an undergrad. You got your master's there, eventually your PhD. So how do you transition from the world of academia to the startup world, which the two are very different in my opinion?
Started out doing research really early on as an undergrad, and that led into my master's research work as we spun out a company called Excelchip, which was later acquired, and then went back to do my PhD. And then a few years later, I had commercialized my PhD research. So it kind of spun out two companies from Northwestern, and mostly in the semiconductor tool space. Around 2004, so I was working for, there's a company called Xilinx. So going to their headquarters and looking down at this hall of just cubicle after cubicle after cubicle, and it looked like a rat maze. And I was just flabbergasted that, like, you know, it literally looked like little mice inside a rat maze, and I'm like, that is not what I want to be doing. At that point, I had made a decision. I'm not interested in working at, these big companies. I'd rather be, a big fish in a big pond, in a little pond, than a little fish in a big pond. And so that really kind of set me towards more of an entrepreneurial, journey, and co-founding several companies.
When you went back for your PhD, was your goal to do some research and eventually commercialize it? Or did you go back just for the love of, learning, or wanted to gain some expertise in something else?
I look at a PhD as not just just doing research. It's a mental state of, it's a discipline of how to approach problem solving. Look at a problem, research the problem, deconstruct it, understand how to find others or common, areas where we can apply different thought. It gives you a level of maturity, be your own sort of entrepreneur, and do the work on your own. And it's really up to you to come back and solve the problems on your own. It's that level of maturity, I think, that you have to develop.
You speak of maturity in entrepreneurship, but you teach a lot of undergrads that are going through the entrepreneurial path. I was one of your students. What do you think is the most common mistake that young entrepreneurs that you teach are making today?
As much as I love teaching entrepreneurship, you really can't teach entrepreneurship. You can sit there, you can read a book, you can go to a classroom, and you learn like sort of the recipes, but the greatest lessons you could learn as an entrepreneur is failure. You have not learned how to be an entrepreneur until you really learn how to fail, and fail fast. There's no, a direct line from point A to point B. It's lots of waves, lots of ups and downs, lots of hurdles, lots of sleepless nights, and you have to be prepared for that. And no, you can't learn that in a classroom. And so you have to be, cognizant of whether or not you want to go through that experience, right? And I think what's most important in my classes is giving them the tools so that they're prepared. You always have a plan B and a plan C in your back pocket, so that you can, when these things arise, you're prepared for them. And that you're still going to go through these ups and downs, but at least you can ride the waves and you can better prepare yourself for the inevitable.
Have there been any ideas that your students have had that you're like, this is a great idea, it can't fail, and then end of the day it did fail?
Oh, there's lots of those. And there's lots on the other side. I'll give you an example. There was my last class, there was a team who was working on an AI as a, psychology. There are long, long lines to get into a therapist. Many people are struggling with anxiety and other problems, and certainly students, and there's lots of things going on around the world. The thought was, well, we can create an AI that can respond to anxiety and people with immediate needs and so on. And I just thought, it's a great idea, but it's laughable because AI can't have that emotion. It doesn't make sense for an AI to take the place of a psychologist. Like you can give it every book in the world and it still won't exude that emotion, that sensitivity. Well, not 6 months later, NVIDIA and OpenAI are starting to come out with all new platforms in GPT 4.0, and you're listening to the emotion built in to the newer AIs and the LLMs. I sat back and I'm like, oh my God, like that was the missing piece. You can now create or synthesize emotion. And I go back and I think to myself, you know what, probably in another couple years, this thing will be advanced enough. I didn't think it could get that advanced that quickly to create that level of sort of an emotional response when you're listening to it. I tell my students, you got to think outside the box, like really far outside the box. And some people go really, really outside the box. And I'm like, whoa, you got to take a step back there. Maybe it's a little too far, but maybe I just wasn't thinking far enough.
Do you think AI, because you need such a new train of thought, such a raw train of thought, has kind of shifted the balance of power to young entrepreneurs almost having an advantage with little experience? Or do you still think having that entrepreneurial backing, maybe being a multi-time founder, still plays more to your advantage when leveraging a new technology?
In a sense of a new entrepreneur who is like really wide-eyed and eager and thinks that they can conquer the world versus somebody who's kind of done it several times and they might be seasoned at it, and they might know how to navigate the things, but that ability sometimes to kind of take big leaps, might be more difficult for a more seasoned person versus somebody who just doesn't see all of the noise that we do. I would suggest that they have, an edge early on. I do think though that you're, as I mentioned, like you have to go through this journey of failure. You have to actually experience failure, build a thick skin, and to be able to continue doing this over and over again.
And building in this AI world, what do you think outside of the tech has changed since you started building, since you started teaching and earning your PhD in fields like AI?
The level of productivity is increasing by orders of magnitude. I don't know, maybe I can code 1,000 lines of code in a day. I can do 10x that using, ChatGPT and other tools, similar tools. And so I think there's a benefit there, right? Is that as an entrepreneur, I could now spit out an MVP and iterate and add new features much quicker. The idea of agile development and sprints, like that's going to come much easier because the ability to quickly iterate and test and evaluate is going to become so much easier because the level of code and accuracy and all those things you'll be able to do that much, much quicker. So there's a benefit for those who are really in tune with AI today and who are just really jumping in. That is absolutely game changing. And that's why we're really right now we're entering the fifth industrial revolution where things are going to radically change. And I tell people this, and it's kind of scary. Not just one little area of change. It's not just entrepreneurs and computer scientists. It is literally every industry is going to radically evolve to a point where it's almost like you're going to wake up one day in the next 6 months or a year, and you will not recognize. It's kind of like looking back at I remember the 90s, where I grew up in the 90s, and but it's like flipping a switch. You're not going to recognize the days of I had to code. What was coding like? You're not going to need to do that anymore. You're going to be people are going to be elevated to a higher point, directors, architects, we're going to be giving orders, prompting, and the AI will be building that under the hood. That'll be of programming in higher languages. We're going to be speaking in higher languages, and the AI is going to be the synthesizer who's going to turn that into action. I don't know if, computer science as we think about it today the programmers and so on, those folks, I think over time, that type of design work, I think, is going to slowly get phased out, and will be more, sort of high level prompting. Will be kind of putting blocks together instead of actually going down and coding. The velocity in which change is happening, if you follow the AI and what's going on right now in the industry, it's happening so rapidly that you blink your eye and it's just like, boom.
Justin Fong, the founder of NVIDIA, has said that, students, young people, they shouldn't learn how to code because in an AI world, you won't need to. But then Gary Tan, the CEO of Y Combinator, he still says there's an art to coding, almost like the digital camera didn't replace artists. So where do you see, and what advice would you give to someone that's a young entrepreneur? Where should they spend their time? Should they still learn how to code, or is there something else that they should prioritize?
I use another analogy in my class, and once upon a time, we as humans used to get around through horse and buggy and horses and biking. And then the car was invented. And the car really just allowed us to travel longer distances, connect with people, family, much quicker, much more efficient. The bicycle didn't disappear. We still ride the bicycle. Many people still ride the bicycles to work. But more and more people, obviously, today are taking, cars and such to get around. That might change again in the near future. But so just because new technology comes in to sort of augment or replace or improve, what it did was it just allowed us to be more productive. I can get from here to work in, 20 minutes versus, an hour. So I have more productivity. I can be working on other things. But I still enjoy biking, and I love the exercise, and I love, the feeling of it. And I think the same way of coding, you will always need people who are developing the applications that other people need. So I don't think that's not going to go. You're not going to have, for a while now, you're not going to have just AI building AI. There will be still the researchers and developers and stuff who are developing those next generation tools. So that's not going to go. One particular person will now be able to do the job of, 10 or 20 people. And so you might need, in a particular company, you'll cut down your work staff. Where those other people go, well, they'll create new jobs. They'll create new companies. They'll do, there'll be other opportunities. What matters most is not the actual coding, but the critical thinking skills that go around it. Right. And you were referring to it as an art, some of it is art. And that's absolutely true. I get the same sort of feeling, when I code, when I write a successful piece of code as I do when I pick up a guitar or play the piano. There is an element of creativity and such, that same kind of feeling. So I don't think that's going to go away. I do think, though, that as we elevate, the critical thinking skills is really what matters. And that's, by the way, just one other thing. I know I'm rambling here, but you have you have a lot of students who are just learning new languages. They're picking up a language. Which language should I learn? And one thing I tell my students is, like, it really doesn't matter at this point, because a lot of that is going to disappear. What matters most is you understand the underlying semantics, the algorithms, the data structures. You understand what sort of technology to apply to what situation. That critical thinking skill is important to be able to direct the AI or whatever it is to be able to implement the right sort of solution for your problems.
If you're me, 23, know how to code the basics, or don't know how to code at all, and want to build a tech startup, what do?
Hire a CTO who's going to be your go-to to do all of those things. We're not there yet. But I would say that you never want to outsource your IP. Your technology needs to be done in-house. You don't outsource it to some dev shop or, some people. So it's really important to first fundamentally get a tech startup. You need to bring in a technology person to help develop or oversee the development, or actually go, hit the ground and do the design work too. And that's often what I do too. I mean, I help startups, and I come in there and I I will build or architect the technology from the ground up, build the teams, launch the MVPs, and get it to the next stage.
So what do you think are the most overhyped and underhyped parts about AI?
You don't want to underestimate the potential capabilities, because I think that's probably the biggest mistake. I mean, we do need to be sort of fearful of what AI could do when it's put in the hands of the wrong people, but we also need to be sort of optimistic about the capabilities of problems we'll be able to solve, like solving cancer, solving new scientific problems, identifying, threats and other things that I think could be really important. Where I think a lot of startups fall short these days is that they build their entire technology on top of, an LLM, and they're just using an LLM to spit out something. And that in and of itself is not of value. I think investors have caught on to this, right? But anyone could copy that. It's going to come down to your data. What data do you have that you bring that nobody else has, or the knowledge base that you bring? And so I think that has to be understood. If you just have an app that can talk to an LLM and it will give you it will set up tasks for you and so on. Like, anyone can replicate that, right? What can you do that's unique that others cannot do?
So you're really talking about what people consider to be ChatGPT wrappers. And Sam Altman has come out and said, if you're making like a wrapper on top of OpenAI, ChatGPT 5 will, in his words, steamroll you. So what really is your definition of what makes a ChatGPT wrapper, and kind of something that will last the times, that can't get steamrolled by OpenAI?
It's what you do with the LLM at the end of the day that I think makes a difference. As an example, there's something called agentic AI. For those who have not come across that yet, but when you code, it's an iterative process. So you'll write some code and then you'll test it, and maybe you'll get it right the first time, maybe you won't, and then it'll report a bug and you'll go back, you'll fix the bug and you'll try again. Maybe there's another bug, or maybe the performance is not as good. Many things in life is all about trial and error. And the agentic flow essentially is this iterative process. LLMs today are basically single shot, right? You put in a prompt and it spits something out. There is no iteration there. Now, you can plug in tools. You can say, hey, go scrape the web and go find this information. But it suffers often from hallucinations. Sometimes it gets things wrong. So if you just accept it as ground truth on the first shot, I think that's where you're going to run into problems. Where you start to build newer capabilities is in this iterative flow. How quickly can you iterate, validate, optimize, and so on, right? And go through that loop and pull in different resources and stuff. Now you're sort of building in what's called LLM ops, and tying different sort of threads together to kind of create something much more powerful. An LLM, such as a GPT-5, is going to steamroll you. Well, it's going to have a much more powerful engine, but it's still going to suffer from the same problems that GPT-4 and GPT-3.5 and all these other ones do, which is there's the hallucinations, there's only a limited amount of knowledge it has, which is the stuff that it scraped off of the public web. It doesn't have private knowledge. And so you have to be able to bring those things to the table.
When you talk about like a ChatGPT wrapper, what is enough added layers, right? Where you're building something that's not just, like you were saying, someone can else just like replicate it. How do you know like you're doing enough?
It has to pass the smell test. It's I don't know anyone can necessarily tell you, but from internally, if you're the designer, the inventor, if you are simply just asking the LLM to spit something out one time, that's not going to be efficient, right? Let's suppose you have an LLM. You have let's say your Siri, your HomePod, or your Alexa, and you say, what's the weather, right? And it reports the weather. That's not innovative. But if you said, what's the weather? And it says, well, it's going to be super sunny out. Let me turn down the shades in your apartment for you, right? It has not just automation built into it, but it has knowledge of its environment, its surroundings, to be able to take actions or suggest actions.
Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, they just came out with Llama 3.1, an open source model. And obviously, OpenAI is a closed model. What is your take on the whole regulation of like open source models versus having a few private companies run the most models, run like the larger model?
I think it's good to have a balance of both. We learned a big lesson from Google's epic failure with their release of Gemma. It was programmed with diversity that was returning some very incorrect historical knowledge or false knowledge, and so that was sort of catastrophic for them as their first sort of model. And I think communities should decide what is the best sort of training, the best sort of model for their use cases. And so providing an open source model like a Llama 3 that you could then fine tune, that is, open source and so on, where you can do whatever you need to do or train it on what you need. Though that's great for let the individual communities sort of regulate themselves. You do need private companies innovating and creating some of these things too. So, we're in a capitalistic society, and I believe in capitalism, and you should have private companies creating private versions of their tool, and some people use them, and others will look to use some of the open source. I will say, as somebody who's kind of evaluated many of these, there is a limitation on some of these open source and what their capabilities are. If you're creating a chatbot with a serious, serious capabilities of being able to have, really, really dynamic conversations, you're not going to be able to do that with a Llama 7B. You need state-of-the-art hardware and technology to be able to run like a Llama 3.1. That's very costly, and to be able to run that and to host that at its full capacity is not necessarily attainable right now for most companies. So I don't even, just because they released it, it doesn't mean it's really, quote unquote, available to the masses. Diversity and thought is really the most important thing. Putting it all in the hands of a couple of tech companies to own the technology and what the LM can and shouldn't say is already proven to be an epic disaster and bad for everybody. And so my thought is the open source, I think, creates a balance.
And what about the negatives, though? You consider deep fakes, but also AI can be used in more malicious ways than that. What are your thoughts on that, and kind of that being the counterbalance to allowing open source, allowing anyone to have access to an LLM model and program it to do anything they want?
The simple answer is you don't do anything. What you do is you come out with newer technologies to combat the security risks and identifying the deep fakes and so on. You don't shut down speech to protect speech. You create more speech to combat bad speech. And the same thing, I think, with technology. We're just talking about people creating images and creating videos. It sucks, but what we need is our tools to be able to recognize this is a synthesized image or watermarked by the AIs, that this has been synthesized versus and there's technology you can do that. So those could be built into the LLM, and which might be appropriate. So you're not shutting down speech, but at least or thought, but you are watermarking its originality.
I do have one last question for you. Since you started your career in entrepreneurship, has there been any routine that you've maintained throughout the years?
You got to have balance in life. I look at being a professor as half of that balance. Being an entrepreneur sometimes could be also a very lonely trek. You work in small teams. Maybe you're solo. Maybe your teams are scattered all over. And being able to enter into a room and teach and mentor and converse and doing other things. That's one part of the balance of, this heavy work. So many things going on in this world. Is easy to get lost, but you got to get out there. You got to connect with people. You got to find your place. You can't just shutter yourself in a little room in a basement and just code the rest of your life. And I think that's what makes a true entrepreneur, is somebody who really ventures out into the world.
I think that makes for the perfect ending. And with that, I'm Sahil Seth.
I'm David Zaretsky.
And this is UNinvested. Thank you. This is a personal video. Any views or opinions represented in this video are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations we may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. The views expressed are for entertainment purposes only and not to be misinterpreted as actionable investment advice.